The candles in the sept burned like a field of stars blown down to earth, their small flames bowing to draughts that came whispering from the stone. Honey and myrrh, and the thin astringent of censer smoke, had soaked the air until it felt like a perfume one could drown in. Beneath them all, on a bier too grand for any child, and not grand enough for a king, lay Joffrey, his face stilled into an expression he had never learned while living. The silversmith had fitted the boy's brow with a circlet, meant to suggest triumph. To Jaime it looked like a thin line drawn under a sum he could no longer reckon. He stood and watched the flames gutter, listened to the slow drip of wax becoming shape, felt the night go on. It seemed to him that time had paused here, as if the bells would never toll another hour so long as this room remained full of breath and heat and memory. He did not know how long he had been standing with the white cloak pulled about his shoulders like a thawing snowbank. When he grew tired, he shifted his weight, and the new gold hand pressed coldly against his hip. A useless ornament with the weight of a judgment. He had not yet learned to stop looking for his right hand when his thoughts turned to deeds. He had not yet learned to stop expecting to be the man he had been before a bear pit, before a long road, before a woman with truth carved into her face had looked at him and asked what honor meant and why he had none. Cersei had come and gone twice since dusk and would come again by dawn. The first time she had thrown herself over Joffrey and sobbed until her throat sounded flayed, a performance of grief so complete it allowed no space for another sorrow. The second time she had been dry-eyed and coiled as a lash, demanding Tyrion be made to bleed, not in a court, but on a block. She had grabbed Jaime's wrist, his left wrist, the good one now, and said, "You swore to keep us safe." The word us had been a dagger laid down between them. It had always meant herself and whatever she loved at the moment. It had rarely included him. It had never included the realm. Now only the silent sisters remained, beetle black in their habits, moving like tiny storms along the edges of the room. A septon dozed in a chair as if prayer had lowered him gently into sleep. Tommen had been led away long ago, cheeks raw with crying, to be pressed into sheets that smelled of lavender and childhood. Jaime could not remember the last time he had slept. He had stretched his body like a bow these past days, strung tight from sanctuary to corridor, from council to corridor, from chamber to corridor, all the ways of power being so many stone hallways, down which words and vows echoed until the meaning thinned. He went to Joffrey's side and looked down and tried to imagine the boy alive. Joffrey fidgeting, face pinched with impatience, mouth open for the nearest cruelty. He tried to imagine the boy as the son he had held once in a hidden chamber, a small weight warm against his chest, Cersei's eyes upon him bright as wine. He tried, and could not manage either vision. The boy on the bier had been smoothed beyond the edges that had given him shape. Death was a better sculptor than any master he had known. It pared away lie and habit, and left only the unarmed truth. The truth was that Jaime had not known the boy at all. A murmur at the doors lifted him out of the thought. The sisters glanced up and tilted like birds sensing weather. A figure came in with the night still clinging to him. The smell of old parchment and dust rode before him like a herald. Varys bowed at a distance that might have been reverence or caution or both. His face had been arranged with sorrow, but the chief sorrow in it, Jaime thought, was for the labor of arranging any face at all. The eunuch moved to stand at Jaime's side as if they had been friends all their lives. "Sir Jaime," said Varys, soft as a secret, "your vigil does you honor." Jaime did not look at him. "Is there any left to heap?" "Honor? Always." Varys laced and unlaced his fingers. "And grief has a bottomless appetite for ceremony. You've a bottomless appetite for hearing yourself speak." Jaime replied, but without heat. He had discovered after Harrenhal that the sharpness of his tongue had been a blade he had kept honed to defend nothing at all. "If you've come to say something, say it." Varys breathed in the incense as if tasting it. "The city is realized in rumor tonight. One says the gods punished the boy's impiety. Another says the Tyrell girl learned in Highgarden how to cultivate more than roses. Many say your brother poisoned his king before the second course could be cleared, though those who have met your brother and the late king both hesitate to call that a crime. And many have learned to like the scrape of their own voices," Jaime said. "Like you." I speak because I am asked to, Varys said mildly, and because it profits me to know who listens. You listen, not always to me. That is perhaps a pity. Jaime let the silence stretch until the eunuch's patience proved better than his own. Say your say. Cersei will demand swiftness, Varys said. And swift things break when they travel through a crowded place. We are in a crowded place, Sir Jaime. There are the Tyrells, who wear wreaths of green but keep knives beneath. There is Prince Oberyn, who smiles for some secrets and frowns for others. There is your father, who knows how to break a place and call what remains a settlement. There is Tommen, who is a boy, and the city, which is always hungry, and the city which is all... What am I? Jaime asked, tired of the eunuch's litany. Someone who once slew a king to save a city, Varys said. Someone who has been unmade and remade, and who must choose what to be now that his hand has been taken but his name remains. I have many names, Jaime said. He put his golden hand upon the bier and felt nothing through it. None that matter. Varys gazed for a long moment at the small still face under the circlet. The queen will have your brother's head if she can take it. She will have more beyond it. The city is wood soaked through with oil. Flame touches and the whole goes up. Now. A memory rose unbidden, sharp as a blade. Aerys whispering burned them all while the pyromancers leaned over their green-black jars. Jaime swallowed. If you have a thought that isn't a riddle, give it me. Your brother's cell has 2 locks and a pair of eyes outside it, Varys said. Neither are mine. Jaime smiled despite himself. Then why am I listening to you at all? Because you know this city's wines better than any man born without them in his hair, Varys said. And you can smell a fire before the smoke is thick enough to choke on Jon. He stepped back, folded himself into a bow like a collapsing book, and padded away between the candles until he was only a smudge of night among the smaller knights. Jaime remained. The silence pressed. The gold hand shone dully in the candlelight, a blank coin. He lifted it and studied the workmanship he had allowed. The fingers articulated with uncanny smoothness. The knuckles caught light as if it were something you could grip. It was beautiful, and it was wrong. He flexed the fingers and the gears under the brass skin clicked like distant beetles. He thought of the white book, of empty pages, of the line he had dreamed once of writing for another man to see. He kept his vows. He thought of Cersei's fingers on his wrist, nails digging crescent moons. You swore to keep us safe. Us. He left the sept near dawn. The sky beyond its doors had been paled by the moon's own jealous gaze until it was almost morning. The city lay below him like a beast asleep, its back a curve of roofs and lanes, a little steam rising where the night's breath met the day's warming. He walked without escort past the statues blind with piety, down the stairs that had borne kings to righteousness and back again, crossed the yard where new-made knights once shivered like new-made blades. Maegor's holdfast brooded above it all, squat as certainty. The white sword tower waited with its own pool of quiet at its base. Inside, the air was cleaner, scented with oil and parchment, and the faint metal tang of steel at rest. The white book lay upon its stand open to a blankness so pure that for an instant he could pretend the years had not crept here, that his youth might yet be recaptured with ink and intention. He turned pages. All those lives, all those shapes taken by one vow. Sir Ryam Redwine's entries had been corrected by a later hand, the boastful bleached down to nearly plausible. Sir Criston Cole's page had been scored in the margin by someone's pen like a private curse. On and on the white leaves turned until his own opened beneath his hand. 3 lines, the last of them cut short like a man's breath in mid-thought. Sir Jaime Lannister, called Kingslayer. He killed the mad King Aerys de Targaryen before the gates of the city could be fired with wildfire. The ink had faded, but the shape of the letters still looked angry. He read it twice, a boy hoping a kinder ending had arrived, while he had not been looking. Heavy steps sounded on the stair, each one careful for not waking something that ought not be disturbed. Sir Loras went by the door without glancing in, the plume of his helmet dragging across the jamb like a cattail's tip across a pond. Young, bright, and dangerous as spring ice. That one had come to the cloak as if it were only another silk to be worn as part of a tournament. Jaime watched him vanish and wondered if anyone had ever told him that the White Cloak's weave included ghosts you could not shake off. He closed the book. The clasp clicked shut with an officious little sound, as if it had been pleased with him. He stood a moment longer and then went out. Cersei's chambers smelled of roses and spilt wine, and a sharp note that winter carried into rooms where windows were not quite fastened. The guards let him pass without comment. One of them had the narrow face of hunger. The other had the bored look of a man who had forgotten most days as soon as they had been spent. Cersei dismissed the woman who tended her hair with a flick of fingers. Pins came loose and were swallowed into sleeves. She stood by a long window that framed the pale slope of morning, looking outward as if the city might supply an answer. If only she gazed for long enough. "You've been to the Sept," she said without turning. "I have," he said. "Did you pray?" she asked. The word shaped mockery, and he wondered when it had happened that they could not speak without carving each syllable into the other. "I watched," he said. "Joffrey looks like a boy when he sleeps." That brought her around. "Don't call him that," she said, the color rising in her face so swiftly it looked like a rash. "He was a king. He was a boy who wore a crown," Jaime said softly, and discovered there was no malice in the truth, only sorrow made to stand upright. "Tommen is a boy who will wear one. Our son is dead and you come to lecture me on words." Her voice splintered. "You always did love your sayings better than any duty." "I've done my share of duty," he said. He lifted his golden hand and let it catch the light. "It cost me enough. An ornament for a missing limb?" she said, her mouth curling. "Fitting. You always were more decoration than man." He let it pass. "Cersei." She took a breath that hitched at the top like a wheel striking an old rut. "They will kill Tyrion," she said. "I will see it done." Father agrees. He poisoned Joffrey because that is what he is, a little man empty of honor who hates those born to rule. He did it to wound me. Even now, he seeks to humiliate me. "Ben? He is your brother," Jaime said. "So are you," she replied. "And what has it earned me?" He turned to the window and looked out at the city that had held their childhood and their sins, both. A gull hung in the air for a long, lazy moment, as if nailed to the dawn by its own idea of beauty. His reflection in the glass floated beside Cersei's, his face longer with wear, her mouth pressed thin by habit. They had been beautiful together once. The memory was a kite that tugged in a wind that had died. "There are other ways," he began. We could what?" Her laugh was a brittle thing. "Wait, pray, ask the gods for the miracle of mercy." Is that the new Jaime? A man who talks to paper and candles and hopes the world will turn good if he stares at it long enough? "We could seek the truth," he said, and said it knowing how foolish it sounded in this room. "I know the truth," she said. "You think because you have been away, you can tell me what shape my world is. You think because some pigwoman knight talked honor to you in a bathtub, you have learned a language I did not teach you. But I know better, Jaime. I always knew better. The world is a blade. You take it up, or it cuts you. Tyrion cut Joffrey and I will cut him back. Mentor." He closed his eyes. Brienne's face rose before him. Sea-weathered and fierce, plain as bread, truer than food. He opened his eyes and looked at the woman before him, and saw in her the same hunger he had seen in the guard's face outside, but fed on rancor instead of soup. It filled her and thinned her at once. It would not be satisfied. It would eat Tommen in turn. It would eat their house. It would eat the realm. It had 1,000 years of appetite to draw upon. He realized he had been holding himself at the lip of that thought for hours, perhaps days, as a man holds himself at the lip of a cliff, toes gripping rubble, certain the ground will slide if he shifts his weight. He realized there was no certain ground anywhere that did not involve a choice. "What would you have me do?" he asked. Her eyes gleamed. "Be what you swore. Be my sword." She touched his golden hand with 2 fingers and then recoiled as if it had burned her. "Bring me his head." Jaime nodded slowly as if in consideration. The motion gave him time to draw breath as one might draw water up from a deep well. The taste of iron in his mouth surprised him. He thought again of the white book, of the blank page and the 3 lines at the top of it, and the words that named him. Of the day he had stood at the foot of a throne, while a madman spoke of fire, and a city had breathed around them, not knowing it had been saved. "Come," he said. "If I'm to bring you comfort, at least let me give you air." He laid his hand, his left, the living one, against the small of her back and guided her toward the open doors that led to the balcony. The morning had thrown off its paleness and put on a color that made the black slate roofs gleam. Far below, the yard where they had once played like any children showed a pair of tiny men sparring with staves, their motions childish from this height. She allowed herself to be led. Anger cooled to a curl of smoke, suspicion taking one of its 1,000 seats in her gaze. The guards did not follow. She had dismissed them with a gesture when he had entered, as if the sight of him warded greater dangers than steel could parry. The balcony's stone balustrade ended their steps. Jaime leaned on it and felt through the stone a bone-deep cold, the kind that traveled. He looked down, not at the drop but at the city's stones beyond, and found in their thousands a steadying. He found in their thousands the kind of multitude a choice could be made for. Cersei tucked stray hair behind her ear. So small and domestic emotion he nearly laughed at the human of it all. "You think the wind will cool me? It won't. Nothing will." "The wind cools everyone," he said, and stood close enough to smell the red lingering still upon her skin. He remembered the first time he had touched her in such a place. Young and burning with a certainty so simple, it now seemed a fever. He had believed they could carve a new law out of their hunger. He had been wrong in the way that ruins kingdoms. He turned to her. "Listen to me. You need to let this pass through you. You need to bend. Otherwise you'll break." "Oh." She stared at him as if he had learned to speak Dornish in his absence. "You bend, if you wish. I have never bent to anyone. I will not begin with grief." Her hand came up and pressed briefly to his cheek, a motion so ghosted by tenderness that his bones ached with it. Then her fingers slid to his throat. "Bring me his head, Jaime. Or don't come to my bed again." 100 cheap courtiers would have quailed at the price. He had paid dearer already. He took her hand from his throat and held it in his own, feeling the pulse quick through the tendons. Her skin was warm, alive, her strength familiar as his own shadow. "You ask too much," he said. "I ask what is owed," she returned. "No," he said. "You ask me to become your knife forever." "You are my knife," she said, and her mouth softened on the word my. The old possessive purring like a cat in the afternoon sun. "You always have been." "No," he said again, and felt the word lodge and become fact. He had not noticed the moment when a thought becomes a pillar one can lean a decision against. He noticed now. Her eyes narrowed, every trace of warmth burning away in an instant. "Who taught you to say no to me?" "The road," he said. "Harrenhal, a bear, a woman, hunger, loss." He met her gaze. "The sight of you tonight, the sound of you." "Stand aside," she said. "I have a kingdom to arrange." "You have a kingdom to burn," he said, "and you don't even smell the smoke." She moved then, because she was not a woman who stood still when words did not serve. She tried to pull her hand away, and he did not let it go. She tried to slap him with her other hand, and he caught it with his gold, and felt nothing. Some part of him noticed how easy it was to hold her with a hand that could not feel. Some colder part. He drew her closer, not as a lover draws, but as a man draws a stone from the road that would otherwise turn a wheel and shatter a cart. He thought of Eris, and of the blade that had been clean and necessary. He thought of Tommen sleeping with his face warm as a hearth. He thought of a book waiting for an ink that would not lie. "I'm sorry," he said, and was surprised to find he meant it more for the boy than the woman. Then he turned her, the way a dancer might, and set her back against the stone. Her mouth opened. He might have kissed it to silence once. He did not. He put his shoulder against her, and the gold hand to her collarbone, and the living hand to her wrist, and he pushed. Not hard. Just enough. The balcony's lip had a little height to it, meant to keep what belonged within from wandering over by accident. It had been sufficient for children in play and drunken lords, and the occasional dog. It was not sufficient for a decision. The wind took her hair first, flinging it upward as if the sky had reached to catch her. The rest followed, the red of her gown a brief flare against the morning. For a moment she looked as she had years ago, when she had been a girl daring him to leap from rocks into a summer river, fearless and furious both. Then the moment broke. Sound rose a heartbeat after, the scrape of fabric against stone. A small, undignified gasp cut off mid-note, the long silence of the fall. He did not look after she went. He kept his eyes on the balustrade and the little chip in its stone that looked like a crescent moon. He did not know how long he stood there. A gull cried, having decided finally to be a bird again. Somewhere, a bell began solemnly to persuade the city that something had happened worth gathering words around. In the room behind him, a pin rattled where it had rolled and struck a leg of the dressing table. He walked back into the chamber and adjusted the chair by the hearth that had been moved slightly askew. He smoothed the coverlet where a wrinkle had bunched against Cersei's vanity's foot. He took 2 pins from the carpet and laid them neatly on the table. He closed the window but did not bar it. The wind shoved a hand through before the panes met like a boy pushing at a friend's shoulder in rough affection. He left by the antechamber. The guards looked up as he came, and there must have been something in his face, because the hungry one straightened and the bored one swallowed. He nodded to them as if he had been asked to fetch water for a guest. The hallways carried rumor quick as a stream carries leaves. Servants scurried like mice away from the knowledge that had begun to gather itself, but had not yet fully formed into words. He entered the yard and the air took him whole. The smell of kitchens and sweat and horse and iron like a hand steadying someone just risen from a sickbed. He did not rush. There was no sense in haste. Haste looked like guilt where patience could pass for sorrow or shock or anything one wished it to be. The first screams lifted high thin threads into the morning. A woman's voice tore at the edge of what it could stand, and then slumped into a low, unbearable wail. A man shouted orders, and other men repeated them with that mindless fervor that is part obedience and part terror. The news outran the men carrying it. Jaime reached the steps to the white sword tower as a page hurtled past, face white as he shouted, "The Queen! The Queen!" as if the word itself made rain. Inside the tower he had a moment of peace he had not earned. He went to the basin and splashed water on his face, and found his hands shaking, the gold one ridiculous at his cheek. He laughed once, a sound that tried to turn into a sob and did not make it. He dried his face. He stood. He looked again at the book on its stand, and then away. There would be time for ink, if there was any time at all. The yard roared. Lords and ladies, and those who were neither but dared the name in their hearts, flowed toward Maegor's holdfast like the small rivers that all find the sea. Jaime crossed through their currents, letting hands brush his cloak, hearing words that were not yet arranged into sense. Fell, wind, witchcraft, pushed, jumped, gods, justice. My lady, please. He moved toward the place he had to be. The small room where Tommen had slept with his face pressed to a stuffed lion's. Tommen was awake and confused, eyes swollen and mouth red, hair stuck to his brow. Sir Meryn stood stiff in the corner, pretending to be an emblem of valor instead of a lazy brute. The woman who had sat at the foot of the boy's bed had the terrified fragility of a bird that had learned a window glass. She looked at Jaime the way the bird looks at the cat who has protected it once, but may be hungry now. "Your Grace," Jaime said, kneeling, because it would comfort the boy to see men kneel to him. Tommen blinked. "Uncle," he said, and then remembered. "Sir." Jaime took his hand and felt how small it was, how warm. The boy smelled of sleep and fear and lavender. "There's noise," Tommen said. "Is there a tournament? Are they fighting?" "Merci. There's been an accident," Jaime said, and marveled at the lie's ease, and the truth within it too. You may hear men speaking fast. You may hear women cry. None of it will touch you so long as you listen to me. Is Joffrey? Tommen began, stumbling on the name and writing it with hurt stubbornness. Joffrey coming back? No, Jaime said. No, sweetling. The word came out without thought, borrowed from a woman he had once despised, and found he could not wholly hate now that she had proven capable of looking at him and seeing something other than a story others told. Your mother loved you very much, he heard himself say, and wondered if that were true, and if truth mattered so greatly to a boy who would need stories to live. I will keep you safe. Where is mother? Tommen asked in a whisper thin as paper cut. Jaime did not answer. The boy's mouth trembled, and he put his hand upon the child's hair, smoothing it. Listen to me, he said, and made his voice a rope he could tie the boy to. You will soon be asked to be brave, and you will be brave because you are kind. Do you understand? Being brave feels very like being sad. It sits in your chest and takes up more space than there is. But it will not crack you if you do not fight it. Let it sit, breathe around it, and listen to me. Tommen nodded, trusting. Jaime felt something inside him rip with a small neat sound and fold away. He stood and gestured to Sir Meryn. You will keep anyone from this chamber who does not wear white or gold, he said. And you will do it with a spine, sir. If you cannot find yours, borrow one. There are enough in the crypts. Sir Meryn scowled, as if a thought had tried to climb out of his head, and failed. He nodded, puffed up by the mention of duty. Jaime left him with the boy, and stepped back into the torrent. Tywin met him halfway to the holdfast's inner yard. The old man walking with the same measured fury that had carried him through wars and weddings, and into the hearts of enemies who had woken to find their house already in his hands. His face was a map someone had drawn too carefully, the features making a grim sense. Men opened before him like a curtain. When he saw Jaime, something passed over his eyes that might have been relief quickly murdered and replaced by something more useful. What do you know? Tywin said, dispensing with greeting, as with a pointless, Your Grace, or My Lord. All the pretty fluff he had spent a lifetime plucking from power. There was a fall, Jaime said. From the balcony. Did you see it? Tywin asked. No. Good, his father said, and the word shocked him with its quiet sincerity. Where's the boy? In his chamber, Jaime said. I left Meryn Trant. We will pray for a quick dullness of the court's recollection, Tywin said. Meryn Trant is a shield with holes. Stand yourself in the doorway in his place. Where is the girl? What girl? The Tyrell, Tywin said. I told you to find her. Jaime had not. The day had been a knot he had not wished to pull at. She will be secured. Secure her, Tywin said. And the little lambs that bleat around her. If the Tyrells think to fish in this flood, they will find the river runs red. The city will not eat my house because a woman forgot she was mortal. Then how all? Jaime felt the world tilt, a first suggestion of the slip beneath it. You think she fell? Tywin looked at him, and in that look, there was an appraisal so cold Jaime felt chilled through. Whether she fell is not a matter for public discourse, Tywin said evenly. Knowing it is of no benefit. Arranging it is a tragedy for poets later. At present, we need a septon and a dozen torches and a net to catch those who would turn grief to gain. Go to the boy. I will deal with the rest. Then, I am Lord Commander of the King's Guard, Jaime said, and wondered when had it become a plea. You are my son, Tywin said, and stepped past him as if the words had been nothing, the world's simplest answer to a question that had not required it in the first place. Men fell in behind him like geese. Jaime went back to the White Sword Tower, because if he did not make his feet carry him to Tommen, he would walk to the river and keep going until the cold made all his choices someone else concern. He sat by the boy's bed and told him stories about knights whose courage was not a shape carved by the songs, but a long endurance of fear and hunger and duty like an ocean, one learned to float upon. He watched the child's eyes thicken with sleep, and saw that in slumber Tommen pressed his jaw into stubbornness, precisely the way his mother did when confronted with a truth that would not bend. He wondered what parts of her would bloom in him, and how to prune them without cutting the boy himself. The bells tolled. A procession of white cloaks came and went, each of them eager to be seen, relieved to be dismissed. a handful of straws that would claim to be the broom if the floor proved clean enough to be proud of. The sun climbed. Rumor did its work. By midday, the city had decided that Cersei had stepped into mourning and found it treacherous. By afternoon, someone had slapped the word suicide over the moment, as if it had settled the matter. By evening, wine had been poured, and words had been said over the dead, brisk, greedy words that arrhythmed with Tommen's breath in sleep. Jaime went at last to see his brother. The cell was a piece of the city cut out and salted so nothing grew in it. Tyrion sat on a pallet, as if it were a throne slightly too small for his dignity. His face was a map of bruises time had colored, his hair wild, his eyes bright with a kind of interest he only achieved at the edge of catastrophe. When he saw Jaime, he spread his hands. "If you've come to tell me that our sweet sister now drinks air, you needn't trouble to look grave," he said. "There are not enough priests in the world to wring all the gravity out of me." Jaime stood where he was because crossing the cell would have felt like crossing a river to a boat he did not know how to sail. "She fell," he said, "because lies had their uses, and the truth had done enough." "Stone is like that," Tyrion said gently. "One thinks it's safe, and it takes you down anyway." Jaime exhaled. "I didn't come to sharpen your wit." "No," Tyrion said. "You never did. What do you want?" Jaime swallowed, feeling the word that had lodged before work loosen his throat and drop into his chest, heavier now and tied to other things. "To tell you I will not see you die for this. To tell you to wait. To tell you that you must trust me." Tyrion's face softened in that careful way of his, as if the lines were being unpicked with a seamstress needle. "I always did," he said. And there was too much in that sentence. "You come to me with news that makes the city better for my having to look at it from a hole in the ground. And you tell me to trust you." He smiled. "All right, I will. What play do you imagine? Father will ask the gods to certify that the sky remains above us, and then he will pass sentence. The Tyrells will sigh over their crushed flower and demand a bouquet made of heads. Oberyn will smile and sharpen a spear and look forward to some new sport. Where do you place your coin on this board, sweet brother?" Jaime looked down his golden hand, and hating it could not stop him from using it. "On Tommen," he said. "Ah," Tyrion said. "A kind investment. The boy is soft as fresh bread. He will not cut you so long as you wrap him in a clean cloth." He tilted his head. "He will need a cloth. Our father is not made of that material. Our sister was not either. But you," he squinted, "have always been something else. Butter with a knife in it." Jaime laughed, quick and astonished at himself. "You're not wrong," he said. "Tyrion." He stopped, and the words backed up in him like traffic at a gate barred by a dead guard. "I did a thing," he said, unable to give it any other name he could live with saying aloud in this room. Tyrion studied him for a long breath. You could hear the buildings settle around them. You could hear the city breathe. Then his brother said, "Was it necessary?" "Yes," Jaime said. And as it left his mouth, he saw that the answer was both the law and the confession. "Then it will have been right," Tyrion said. "That is the story we tell, so that we can sleep in the long rooms under the world when we have been put in them." He spread his hands again. "Go and do more necessary things. Be certain I still have a head when you need me to speak." "Damn." Jaime stayed a moment more, because leaving too quickly felt like turning away from a cliff you had already stepped from. "I will come for you," he said. "I know," Tyrion said. "I am smaller and cleverer than you, and yet you have always been better at waiting for the right door to open." The corridors above the cells seemed colder, as if they had been cut through the marrow of the Red Keep itself. Jaime climbed and stepped into dusk that had not been kind enough to turn gold. Torches had been lit where the cold bit deepest. The city sounded different when it had a new grief to chew. Voices lower. Merriment held elsewhere like a coin no one wished to show in this market. White cloaks stood in clusters, talking the kind of talk that turned memory into a shape that would fit the stories they would be asked to tell. He felt their eyes on him when he passed. The name that he had tried to live past stepped behind him and matched his stride, as surely as the gold hand swung. "Queenslayer," the air seemed to whisper, though no one said it aloud. He had chosen a way of saving that would not lend itself to songs. He had always had a talent for those. Brienne found him near the stables, where horses breathed steam into the cold, like small engines of warmth placed at intervals to keep the place from freezing into itself. She appeared not as a ghost or a miracle, but as what she was. A tall, tired woman with a sword she knew how to use and a face that would not let a lie sit on it for long. She stepped into his path and looked at him with those level eyes that asked nothing and demanded the same. "Sir," she said. "Lady," he said. He did not know why he felt younger when she was near, only that he did. "There are whispers," she said. "There always are," he said. "These are about the Queen." Her gaze flicked to the gold hand. "About you." He met her eyes. "Do you believe whispers?" "I believe what I see," she said. "And what I have learned to call the shape of a man." "What shape am I?" he asked, half dreading and half hoping to be handed a name he could live with. "Changing," she said simply. "The road does that." She shifted her weight, the mail under her surcoat making a small C sound. "The girls are still lost. Sansa is gone. Arya vanished like a leaf in a river. Every day your city makes more orphans. I need—" She hesitated, and in that hesitation lay humility he had not thought to find in anyone here. "Help. I have a boy king," he said. "I have a father shaping the world as if it were dough, and he the only baker. I have a brother under stone and a city that would send me to the stranger's hall if it could find the courage to hold my gaze. I have a book with 3 lines. I have a hand that is not a hand." He did not know why he told her all of it. He only knew that speaking it to her made the weight arrange itself within him, so that he could stand under it a little longer. "What help do you ask?" "Permission," she said, and surprised him. "Your word to any white cloak or gold cloak who would stop me. Bread for the road. A horse that won't die in a week. Your blessing, if you have one to give." He looked at her and thought of the balcony and the easy distance between choosing and doing, and of this woman's vow like a thread she had braided to the world with both hands, without any song to press it into other men's ears. He felt the urge to laugh or weep or kneel. Instead he reached out and touched the leather guard on her sword where it crossed her chest. A gesture that could be blessing or nothing at all. "Take what you need," he said. "Tell no one what you intend beyond what you must. If any man blocks you, tell him Jaime Lannister will know who made him foolish." She nodded once. "I will find them," she said. "That is a thing I know in my bones." He believed her. He watched her go, a long pale shape in the falling light, and thought that her absence from this place left a hole through which something cleaner might blow. He felt suddenly the night he had been holding off arrive and settle its old thick cloak about the keep. He went again to the White Sword Tower because there are places that draw you when you have chosen to be a certain kind of man, and because ink had waited long enough. He opened the book. The page held its breath like a patient being examined. He took up the quill in his left hand and found his script passing fair for a man who had not written much with that hand. He wrote slowly, each letter like a step you place carefully on a path you have cleared of debris yourself. He kept his king from harm, he wrote. He stood between the boy and the world. He saved the city from a fire no one would have believed in until it had eaten them. He stopped there. The ink glistened. He waited for it to dry, and then considered whether the words were truth or the story he needed to live beyond this night. He decided that for once there was very little difference. A scratching at the door tugged him back out of the small country he had been countrying with his pen. Varys stood in the door again, a sack under his arm as if he had been to market. "Sir," he said. "Enough," Jaime said. He felt oddly light. Perhaps long decisions take heavy weights with them when they finally go. "The hand requests your presence," Varys said. "He has arranged a table upon which a nation may be carved. And if I do not care to carve," Jaime said, "then you may at least ensure he does not eat the plate afterward," Varys said. "Also," he lifted the sack, "a gift." Jaime raised an eyebrow. "A key," Varys said, "to a door that will open at midnight. There are always doors, Sir Jaime. The city is made of them." "For Tyrion," Jaime said. "For whom else?" Varys returned, and his mouth curved. You will find that necessary things often prefer to travel by night. The morning is too full of honesty." He set the sack upon the table and stepped back, as if he had offered a fruit and did not wish to be present when it was bitten. "The gods keep you," he said, with a sincerity so general it became specific. Jaime touched the sack and felt the shape of iron within it, humble and utter in its power. He thought of the balcony. He thought of the book. He thought of Tommen's warm head under his hand. He thought of Brienne walking out of the gate with the world ahead of her like a field through which she would cut a straight, faithful furrow. He thought of himself at last, a man who had loved and hated a woman until the two had become one thing with a sharp edge he had finally grasped. "I will come," he said, and Varys inclined his head as if a ceremony had been completed. When he left the tower, night lay fully over the yard and torches turned men into islands. The city beyond the walls made 1,000 small noises like a forest. Creaks and murmurs, and sudden laughter cut short. Somewhere a singer who had not yet heard tuned a lute to a grief he would milk tomorrow. Jaime walked toward the Hans Solar and felt the world arrange itself to meet him. There would be plans and knives wrapped in courtesies and maps, laid flat to encourage the illusion of mastery. There would be his father's voice, and the taste of iron, and the tiredness that had taken root between his ribs as if it intended to build a house there. Much later, there would be a door at midnight, and a choice that was a continuation of another choice. The world being made of such threads, stitched invisibly from decision to decision until the cloth appeared. Much later, there would be roads for Brienne, and roads for him, and a page in a book that would be written in a hand that had learned to move through weight. Much later, there would be a boy king learning to breathe around the thing sitting in his chest. For now, there was a room full of light, and men who would speak as if they were the light, because light is what men wish to devour when they fear the dark. Jaime entered, and the door closed behind him with a soft sound that could have been mistaken for kindness. He stood where he could see the window. Beyond it, the city's thousands of stones held their silence. He found among them the balcony. He did not look at it long. Tywin looked up. "At last," he said. "We begin." Jaime inclined his head and took his place, the gold hand resting on the table like a gaudy seal that could be pressed into wax to make any lie official. Men spoke. His father spoke. Jaime listened with half his mind, and with the other half, he attended to the steadiness of his own breath. He did not yet know what he would become. He only knew it would not be a knife sheathed under a woman's tongue, nor a man who let other men name him to save themselves the trouble of deciding what they believed. He would be what he had written, or the attempt at it, which was perhaps all any man could boast without the gods laughing. When the candle he had been counting guttered and righted itself, Tywin's voice parted the room like a blade through silk. "We will control the tale," the old man said, and the men around him nodded because tales had always been their weapon against things that could not be killed by steel. Jaime watched the candle steady and thought, not without a bleak humor, that tales were what had ruined him and would save him in equal measure. He thought that if men must live by stories, they ought at least to have the grace to know who wrote theirs. He glanced toward the midnight that had not arrived and found in it a promise he had not expected to make. That he would carry his brother out of the stone and into the next thing, whatever it proved to be. Necessity, Tyrion had called it. Jaime heard another word underneath it. Mercy? He wondered if those two might sometimes be only one word heard by different ears. He waited. He did not close his eyes. He did not turn away from the window. He had chosen, and the choosing had opened a way that was as narrow and straight as a man could make it. All that remained was to walk it, foot by foot, breath by breath, deed by deed, until the page took ink enough to be read by someone not yet born, by a boy who would one day ask what shape a man could be, and find, perhaps, that someone had dared one answer. "Oh, kai ba." They had laid a green silk runner across the long table, a river caught and forced into a straight line. Maps sat beside ledgers, and the ledgers' leather covers had been rubbed so smooth by Tywin's hands that they shone like thin ice. The hand did not sit. He stood at the head of the table as if a chair would concede more to fatigue than he intended. and his presence filled the room the way a hearth fills the house without any flame being shown. Men arranged themselves by him as furniture arranges itself around a lord who has not yet learned to tire. Mace Tyrell had squeezed himself into elaborately damasked grief, a black so glossy it looked more feast than funeral, and the sleeves of his doublet strained as if sorrow were a muscle he could flex. Pycelle perched near the wine as a carrion bird perches by a field, his beard bristling with importance, every wheeze carefully husbanded. Oberyn Martell did not sit, but leaned with one hip against the stone sill, unarmed and wholly dangerous, the curve of his mouth a promise and a threat both. Varys drifted like smoke to an unclaimed corner, and if his hands rested on the back of a chair one might have called it delicate, as a lover rests a palm against a known shoulder. Others came and went. The captain of the gold cloaks, a clerk with a face so pinched it might have been made from a scrap of leather, a lad who had learned to run with a tray, but not yet to do it silently. Tywin's gaze touched each of them and made them reel in turn. "We will tell the city what to say," he began without preface. "And the city will say it. It is winter work. Hard and without thanks. But we will do it all the same." "None." Mace's hand fluttered near his throat, as if seeking a chain he could rattle. "A tragedy without equal," he intoned, looking about to make sure tragedy saw him. "First the king, then the queen. 7 save us. The people will need a pageant of grief, 1,000 candles, a procession through the street of sisters. Perhaps my daughter should throw roses from the sept steps." "Mourning is not a fair," Tywin said, and it was almost boredom, the way he skinned the Lord of Highgarden down to quiet. "The city will be told that Queen Cersei went to the balcony, thought upon her sorrows, and chose to join her son in the gods' keeping. There will be no speculation permitted beyond that. The boy will be crowned as soon as the faith can be bullied into an efficient piety. The Tyrell marriage will proceed at a pace suited to dignity and necessity both. The gold cloaks will be visible and sober. The bakers will sell their loaves for fair prices, even if I have to drown half the men who need them. And while the city grows used to speaking the words we hand it, we will find the hands that killed the king." "Then Tywin." Oberyn shifted. Sunlight running along his cheekbone. "Killed," he said softly. "We passed through tragedy without stopping to ask if we had identified it correctly." Tywin did not turn his head. The king was poisoned. That was not the work of the stranger. It was the work of men. The queen's death is a matter for the faith. The king's death is a matter for me. The queen's death is a matter for you as well," Oberyn observed. "Everything is to hear you tell it." Tywin's eyes permitted themselves a small journey toward the Prince of Dorne. "Do you find your jest in poor taste, or is it merely poor?" "Neither," Oberyn said and smiled. "It is simply a jest. Do not clutch it to your breast and give it a name it cannot carry." He lifted a hand and traced a circle on the stone with one finger, as if he were proposing a dance to no one in particular. "You will have a trial for the king's murder. The dwarf will be accused. The city will throng to see if small men can be hanged with the same flavor as large. If you intend to forego this pleasure, I would wish to be told." "Then tell." "The trial proceeds," Tywin said. "The realm must see that law keeps its habits even when grief attempts to interrupt its meal." He moved a page with 2 fingers, and the maps beneath flowed subtly. Hills and roads arranged by a hand that had learned long ago that the world was a thing you placed and named, or else it placed and named you. "Sir Jaime," he added without looking up, "you will see the boy safe from the appetite of those who think his crown lights their way." Jaime's voice found him where he stood with the table's edge pressing its cool insistence into the bone of his hand. "I will see Tommen safe," he said, because it was the only blunt truth in the room that did not need to be sharpened on anyone's skin. "Margaery will sit with him," Mace said quickly. "She knows how to soothe a child. She knows how to be looked at while she does it," Tywin said. "Send the girl to the queen's chambers. She will weep prettily in the right places. We will provide a septa who does not smell like onions to keep her from the more vulgar sorts of fawning. The court will attend the vigil in pairs and leave their gossip in the yard. Then," Pycelle cleared his throat with a sound like wet parchment being slowly torn. "My lord Hand," the High Septon has suggested, very humbly of course, that the Queen's body lie in the Great Sept for 3 days and 3 nights, as a symbol. "Of what?" Tywin asked, and the old man blinked as if light had been thrust too close to his face. "Of indecision? Of public rot. We are not in the habit of leaving meat on the table in this city. 2 nights. He made the number sound like a punishment levied on the gods. "And the dwarf," Mace put in, licking a statement as if it were a sweet. "If we are to keep the city's peace, we must be seen to be stern." Varys' voice threaded the air. "Severity is a poor spectator sport if performed poorly. The people will accept a trial so long as they believe it is a play with enough villain for them to hiss. They will accept a judgment so long as it allows them to feel relieved without needing to feel guilty. They will accept any number of heads so long as the bread is fresh and the water runs clear." "Then?" Tywin's fingers stilled on the map, and the room still with them. "The bread will be fresh," he said. "The water will run clear. The city will sit when told. As for the trial, 3 judges. Myself, the Lord Tyrell, and the Dornish Prince, since he insists on finding every stage in which to stand and be handsome." Oberyn bowed slightly, not enough to be mistaken for obedience. "In Dorne, we have no quarrel with handsome men," he said. "We have a variety of quarrels with other sorts. The accused will be kept from knives and rope and the more enthusiastic attentions of those who wish to simplify matters," Tywin continued. "He will be brought into the hall when required and kept from it when not. We will hear witnesses who are useful and dismiss those who are not. We will proceed with dignity." He raised his head. "Dignity is what we have when we have nothing else. The realm will see that I am not yet dead, whatever the gods have undertaken with my children." The words had edges Jaime could not pretend to miss. He felt them lay themselves against him, and considered whether to bend or stand. He did not speak. He watched Oberyn watch Tywin, and he thought that watching between those two was as dangerous as standing between stallions that had not decided if they wished to bite or mate. When men had been arranged into errands, and the wine had been poured into those who required it to prevent flailing, Tywin dismissed them like a schoolmaster who believed learning a punishment. Jaime found the hall cooler than it had been when he entered, as if the room had decided to be stone again once the men had gone. He walked out to a gallery where night had stretched itself taut, humming with a kind of restraint that made men feel louder than they were. The torches sputtered like impatient birds. The city below looked like it had been embroidered with fire. Olenna Tyrell was waiting under a painted arch of grapevines, considering the workmanship with a frown that could have soured wine. She did not start when he approached. She noticed him the way a woman notices a fly who may or may not decide to land on the sugared fruits. Her stick was planted precisely. She could have speared a trout with it. "Sir Jaime," she said, "I hope you have forgiven me for not curtsying. I save my knees for men who last longer." "My lady," he said, resting his shoulder briefly against a pillar, "your daughter is with Tommen. My granddaughter," she corrected, as crisply as snapping a stalk. "And of course she is. She is always where she must be." "Are you?" "I am," he said. She studied his face with a candor few dared. "You look as if you have spent all day telling yourself the truth and only half of it stuck." "Half is more than many manage," he said. "It is," she allowed. "If you mean to be a different sort of Lannister, do it loudly and quickly, before the old sword eats you. The city has learned to fear your father's silence. They will mistake yours for his and hate you in advance. Speak, not in public, but to those who will carry what you say to where it needs to be carried." "Now, what would you have me say to you?" he asked, because he had discovered that conversation with her was most efficient when he conceded she already had it. "That you will not feed my Margaery to your grief," she said. "That you will keep the boy from being stuffed like a goose with every ambition in the city. That if my houses throw you lines across this particular river, you will not decide to drown out of habit." "I will keep Tommen," he said, and found that plain sentence adequate to all of her little tasks. Ace for drowning. He glanced over the parapet at the dark. I have learned to stand on stone. Good, she said. I am an old woman who has very little patience left for men who decide they prefer water once they've dragged all of us out of it. Do you believe your brother guilty? No, he said, and did not hesitate. Do you? That. Olenna's mouth tugged very slightly, as if a fish had touched a line held lightly. Belief is a spice, she said. I leave it on the shelf until the stew is finished. But I have a nose that has served me longer than any of you have been able to grow a beard. It tells me we shall all be very grateful historians one day. Assuming there remain historians. Assuming gratitude survives. Then no. And whose gratitude will that be? He asked. Mine, she said serenely. It's the only sort I trust. Go and do your noble work. Try not to let your father cut it into pieces and rearrange them to look like his own. He is very good at that. She tapped her stick once, twice, as if calling a dog, and drifted away with the peculiar lightness of the aged. A leaf that has decided to ignore gravity out of long practice. Jaime stayed until the torch nearest him coughed wax onto the stone, and he felt ridiculous for anthropomorphizing fire. He found Tommen in the Queen's chamber. Small in a chair too grand for any boy, with Marguerite on a low stool by his knee. Her head bent as she spoke to him of something so gentle it made the room feel disreputable. The child's hands worked at a twist of cord. He had always liked small acts with endings. Not, unknot, not again. Marguerite's voice was the kind you hand to children and horses. She lifted her eyes when Jaime entered, and a question sat waiting in them. He shook his head. Not so much a no as an assurance that a kind of yes remained possible. Sir, Tommen said with the little confidence one borrows from the presence of those who carry their names like shields. Is it true that the wind pushed Mother? The wind pushes everyone, Jaime said. Sometimes we are held by our own hands and sometimes by others. It is not a thing you can fight with your fist. Can you fight it with your crown? Tommen asked. Marguerite's mouth moved, perhaps to soften the question into something that would not bruise the air. Jaime surprised himself by answering the boy as if the boy had been a man he could trust to receive the truth without swallowing it whole and choking. You can use the crown to ask men to stand where they keep the wind off you, he said. You can promise them bread and peace and a kind of pride that does not need shouting. You can send others to keep those promises where you cannot go. You can listen. You can do all of that and the wind will still push. So you learn to bend and not break. And you choose who bends with you. Ben? Tommen nodded seriously, as if he had been given a list he meant to copy into his own hand later. Marguerite touched the back of the boy's neck with a small proprietary grace and then withdrew her fingers, the way a woman tests water before deciding if she will step into it. When Jaime left them, the air of the corridor seemed indecent after the small, careful universe of that room. He went to the yard because his body remembered movement as a kind of thought. The night drilled down into the flagstones. Their old strength came up through his boots and into the meat of him. Ilan Payne stood in the half-shadow and looked at him with the absolute vacancy of a man who had learned to be his function completely. The headsman would have been a jest on any other court stage. Here he was simply a man who had done what was asked and learned to be a space in which requests could die. Jaime drew his sword and offered a nod. Ilan lifted his blade with the economy of a butcher who does not waste gestures when meat and time both rot. They moved. The gold hand weighed him oddly. He had learned to account for it in the slow language of muscle, but not yet in the quick speech of reflex. Ilan did not pity him. Mercy was not in the man, and Jaime did not require it. It felt good to be in pain without needing to name it. It felt simple to suffer in a way that did not require a story. He found a pattern and broke it, and found another. Sweat stung his eyes. The headsman's mouth tugged into what might once have been a smile, and had become a scar's idea of one. They fought until the night took most of the edges off both men and left them human the way sand leaves a bottle smooth. When he left the yard, the moon had shifted position, a small correction in the ledger that governed those accounts. Varys' key lay where the eunuch had placed it, simple iron wrapped in a cloth that smelled faintly of spice. Jaime took it, rolled it into his palm. felt the shape of it become part of him, an extra knuckle, a possibility carried without display. The castle breathed as he went, men muttered in their sleep. Women laughed small secret laughs, a cat made a sin of grace on a balustrade, the wind decided to be generous and threaded the halls with coolness. He walked as a man walks toward a door he has already decided upon. The decision went before him like a lantern, and the shadows it cast were the kind that do not make men turn their heads. Varys met him in a passage so narrow even smoke would have had to flatten itself to pass. The eunuch's candle bled a little wax in apology for being asked to do night work. He held it high, and they went down. Down, the stones sweating them. It was a world men did not speak in. Chains had left their smell in it, and old fear, and the iron of keys. A rat invented a small drama under a pile of wood, and then abandoned it. Jaime did not permit himself to remember other nights. Memory is a wine that takes the sword out of a good hand. At the door he had asked for, Varys set the candle in a niche and lifted a ring of steel that sang like a choir of small dull bells. One key turned, and another. The door yawned softly as if relieved to be asked to do its duty again. Tyrion was awake and had already dressed himself in a shirt whose cleanliness might almost have persuaded a man that its owner had not slept on stone. He and the darkness had been talking, Jaime thought. They had come to the kind of agreement men who have read many books sometimes come to with winter nights. When Tyrion saw his brother's face, a complicated relief flared and was extinguished with equal complexity. "So," he said, "I was wondering which door would open. The one with the rope on its other side, or the one with a story? I should have guessed you would bring the latter. You always had the better library." "Ben?" Jaime stepped in and put the key on the little table that the cell offered as a jest. "We will go now," he said. "There is a postern the rats use. Tonight they will share it with a Lannister." Tyrion glanced at the key and then at Jaime's face. "Before we begin our adventure, indulge me." "Why?" Jaime thought of declining to draw the blade he had carried for years in silence. He drew it anyway. "Because I believe you did not kill Joffrey," he said. "Because father will kill you to teach the city that law has a face, and it is his. Because the boy will need something he doesn't know he needs, and it will be a man somewhere far away whose existence remains a kind of promise. Because..." He stopped. He realized his tongue had run ahead of his courage and found the ground still under it. "Because I did a thing today that must be balanced by another. Not undone. Nothing is ever undone. But balanced." Tyrion's eyes sharpened. He was too clever to put his hand into that bag and pull the truth out like a rabbit, but the urge to do it crouched in him. "A thing?" he said lightly. "We have all done those. What a relief we are to ourselves." He crossed to the door with the unconscious certainty of a man who understands he is a guest in catastrophe, and catastrophe prefers the polite. "We will go then." Varys shifted his candle and looked as if he were considering an apology he could not bestow on the world. "We have a little time," he said. "Not more. The Tower of the Hand is sleeping late. It has had a day of labor. The guards who matter are doing their drinking above ground. The guards who remain below are educating their wine as to the correct angle of a man's throat." "Nam?" Jaime gestured, and the three of them moved through stone like fish through pondweed. At a turn where a different terror had once sat with folded hands, Tyrion stopped, as if the memory had reached out and pinched him. He looked at his brother, and the look had weight. "Jaime," he said. "Be quick." Varys murmured. "Speed is the kindness we can afford ourselves." "Kindness," Tyrion repeated, and then took the word in his palm as if weighing it. "Jaime, do not follow me for a moment. I will be back by the time the candle has wept twice." "Nine so." Jaime's mouth opened and closed. He knew what lay in the direction of that glance. Any man who has spent a life in a castle learns its anatomy as a cheap whore learns her house. All the short corridors, and the places where laughter pools, and the doors that open only for certain hands. He reached for Tyrion's sleeve. It was not the gold hand he used. The living fingers closed, and the old reflex said, "Tell him nothing. Save him by theft." The new man he was trying to be overruled him with a fatigued courage that felt a little like nausea. "Take care," Jaime said. He could have said more. Do not kill our father. Do not turn your pain into a law we must all obey. Do not turn yourself into a map that only shows the way you went tonight. He did not say any of it. He let his brother go. Varys's eyes watched both men without quite blinking. The gods will forgive something, he said, far too softly to be a prayer. Tyrion did not go far in the measure of stone, but in the measure of a man's life. He stepped into a country from which men rarely return anything but stories. Jaime waited in the dim with Varys and listened to the castle's slow heart. A breath came. A small noise was stifled. A new silence laid itself atop the others, like a thin sheet of lead. Varys looked down at his candle, and one drop of wax ran in a bright, very human hurry. When Tyrion returned, what he carried did not show in his hands. It showed in his face, as exhaustion shows in a field after a forced march has passed through it. Lines and small wreckage, and a look that had nothing to do with sleep. Jaime did not ask. Tyrion did not tell. That was their old kindness, the one they had been taught in a house where questions were sharpened and placed carefully under men's pillows. Now, Varys said, as if the word were a bridge ready to be walked upon. He led them through the smothered places, until the air remembered it had a world in it. The postern gate opened onto a smell of old weeds and stale water. The river was a beast shivering in its sleep beyond, and the city's night purred into the reeds with the small hungers that keep it alive. A boat waited with a man in it, whose face had been forgotten by everyone who had not needed to remember it. They stepped in, and the river took them with an indifference that nearly felt like mercy. At the second arch, Varys laid his hand on Jaime's wrist. "Here," he said, and passed him a folded scrap. A small practical letter in a hand too neat to be anything but a clerk's prayer. The words were simple. A day, a place, a cart that would be drawn by a horse with a nick on its left ear. "If you need it," Varys said. "If the world requires you to move a piece quickly, that will not move on its own." "For Tyrion," Jaime said. "For Tommen," Varys corrected mildly. "And for yourself perhaps, if you have finally decided you wish to be the man you keep trying to write." He laid 2 fingers on the letter, light as moths. "We all leave notes for our future selves. Few of us are lucky enough to deliver them." When the boat scraped a wall with its small indifferent kiss and Varys slipped away like someone who has never been, Jaime turned back toward the castle he served and had ruined in equal measure. Dawn felt far. The torches were the eyes of insects strewn along a carcass. He climbed again and reached the parts of the keep that pretended to be awake. Men nodded and did not look him fully in the face. The white sword tower took him in and set him upon the bench, the way a mother puts a boy down and hopes he will not choose the fire for entertainment. He sat until his breath found the pace of the day. A man came to him with a voice slower than his feet, and in that mismatch, Jaime heard the sort of news that drags itself rather than running. He did not need the man's words. He saw them on the messenger's face and read them easily. Grief writes in large letters on fools. Tywin Lannister, Hand of the King, Lord of Casterly Rock, Warden of the West, had died on a privy with a quarrel in him. The room had enough air. He discovered he could not find it. A small, absurd series of details presented themselves to his mind as if in place of feeling. The way his father's belt had always been buckled, 2 holes tighter than most men wore. The exact order in which Tywin had folded his signet and written his instruction and stamped his seal. Stamp last, always. The gesture made the command sound in the wax. The smell of the ink he used to sign the warrants. The smell of the ink he used to... He let those small ghosts cross the room and go out into the hall. He did not call them back. "Fetch the captain of the gold cloaks," he heard himself say. "Fetch Pycelle. Send for my uncle Kevin. Wake the high septon, but quietly. We will have no wailing in the courtyard. We will have no gossip at the latrines. Cross the city on the rooftops if you must." The man gaped. "Go," Jaime said, and the man remembered feet and fled. He rose as if the bench had been a treacherous animal. He went down the hall and up the other, and across the yard that had already begun to suspect. The Tower of the Hand had always smelled a little of mint, a little of iron, and a little of fear. It smelled now of something that refused to be named in polite company, and the sharp, new edge of death. The guards at the door looked as men look when they realize their pay has been rendered in local coin, and the mint has burned in the night. Jaime touched the latch, and the metal was clean and cold and dishonest in his palm. The door opened over the slow syllables of a prayer Pycelle had begun to articulate, and immediately lost. The privy was a small royal jest, paneled in wood, as if wood could make shit noble. Tywin sat where men sit when they have been relieved of all manners by a bodily imperative. His eyes had judged something and been interrupted. His mouth had not chosen a last sentence that would honor a life made of sentences. The bolt had gone through him and pinned him to the wood as one pins a moth, without considering the moth's beauty. Jaime felt, with a small, unexpected soberness, the urge to draw the quarrel out and lay his father down on the floor as a son lays down a tired man after a harvest. He did not move. He stood and learned the shape of the new world. Pycelle attempted a hand-wringing that would have suited a smaller tragedy, and found himself unable to scale. "My lord," he creaked. "My lord, oh." "Find a sheet," Jaime said. "Find a dozen. Find your spine." He turned to the two young gold cloaks who had discovered their swords and forgotten their training. "No one in or out who does not carry a name I speak. If a man tells you he comes from the gods, ask his name as well. If he cannot supply one, keep him outside with the rest." They swallowed. Men were always swallowing when the truth was present. He left them to their incompetence and crossed to the bedchamber. It had acquired a clutter, and in that clutter lay the answer to a question he had not asked and did not need. A length of hair, the color of old honey, trailed from a bolster, and the sheets were twisted as if someone had wished to make a rope of softness. He found no satisfaction in the squalor. It only made the room more itself. Varys was not there. Of course he was not. Jaime stood alone a moment and let the two deaths sit beside each other. They did not speak, these siblings, but he heard them anyway. One had been necessary. One had been inevitable. He did not yet know which was which. Kevin came at noon with a face the city had not learned to read because it had not occurred to the city that it might need to. He took the news like a man receives a blow on the field. He did not fall. He arranged himself around the pane and acknowledged it later, at his tent, with his hands. He looked at Jaime for a long time as if trying to decide if the boy he had taught to hold a wooden sword had hidden somewhere in the man's bones and could be coaxed out with the right call. "We will bury him like a lord," Kevin said at last, simple as bread. "We will," Jaime said. And afterward, his uncle asked, "What will you do?" "Keep the boy safe," Jaime said. Kevin's mouth tugged. "From whom?" "From those who would shape him to their hands," Jaime replied. "And who will you shape him to?" Kevin asked, gently and without malice. Jaime thought of the book and the blankness that had asked him kindly for a sentence that was not a boast. "To himself," he said, and heard the folly and the hope in equal measure. "I will teach him to listen and to be patient with silence when men try to fill it. I will teach him to smile at men who are very certain. I will teach him to say, 'I don't know,' when he doesn't, and to keep his counsel when he does. I will teach him that mercy is not a weakness, and cruelty is not a strength, but both are tools, and either can ruin a man who loves it too much." Kevin nodded as one nods to a man who has set himself a season's work and will need a good share of luck to harvest anything but blisters. "Very well," he said. "I will take the hand's chain and keep it until the realm stops frothing at the mouth. After it has learned to swallow, we will see." He put a hand on Jaime's shoulder briefly, solid as a gate. "I am sorry for your father. I am sorry for your brother." Jaime returned, and that covered as much of the map as words could. The city burned its candles to stumps over two deaths because it did not know how to economize grief. The bells grew tired and did not yet stop. The faith came and did what it knew. It put names where voids had opened and prayed the names would hold. The Tyrells practiced an art they had long mastered, the performance of restraint. Marguerite wore white that flattered the sorrow in her eyes and smiled down from the sept steps, like a promise that had learned to keep itself. Olenna's stick found the ankles of those who spoke too loudly near the bier, and if they did not learn, it found them again. Oberyn did not leave. He took his place at the judge's table and sipped a wine too good for the hall. When told that the accused had disappeared, he only raised his brows as a man raises a cup and drinks to fate's cleverness and embarrassment. Mace puffed, slapping his thighs as if they had been responsible. How could a man evaporate? A dwarf takes up less room when he does it, Oberyn said. He can slip into the cracks. Pycelle shook with indignation, and the pendulum of his beard kept time with his outrage. The Hand's own son, gone from his cell. This is an affront to justice. Kevin folded his hands quietly. He had put the chain on as if it were a yoke. He did not intend to wear longer than the field demanded. Justice, he said, is not offended. She is merely patient. We will proceed with the business of making the city governable. Now we shall. And the mountain? Oberyn asked. His tone remained casual. His eyes did not. He remains unwhipped. It vexes me. Kevin looked at him across a portion of oak that had been sanded to such gentility, it nearly reflected. Sir Gregor Clegane is a bannerman of House Lannister, he said. He will be dealt with when it becomes necessary to deal with him. It will become necessary. Soon, Oberyn said. And the word fell with a little violence. Or am I to take it that Dorne is to swallow all its dead and say thank you for the bones? Dorne is to be patient, Kevin said, and did not blink. Vengeance is a poor harvest to live on. You will find our wine not so bad as to require it. Oberyn's smile showed the benefit of excellent dentistry. Your nephew speaks of mercy as a tool, he said. Perhaps he will learn to use it on those he loves, less than he loved his sister. Jaime did not answer. He had never been a man quick to speech in rooms where every word had a ledger and a sword tied to it. Men took his silence for many things and often for guilt or arrogance. He had learned to be quiet inside their wrongness. But when he left the table, Oberyn followed him to a window where the day had arranged itself into the sort of mildness that tricks men into foolishness and then rains on them. I envy you one thing, the Dornishman said. Not your hair, not your hand. Either of them. Your certainty. You have the look of a man who has decided something and intends to keep deciding it in stages. It is a rare look in this city. It is a rare look in this city. I have decided to keep the boy alive, Jaime said. When you have a task that concerns only two things, breath and a child, it is easier to look as if you have certainty. Is it? Oberyn asked with a little interest. You should visit Dorne. We have an astonishing number of dead children. Perhaps they lacked uncles. Perhaps they had too many, Jaime replied, and surprised himself into liking the prince a little. You will have your chance at Clegane, he added, but not now. I will not throw a torch onto a floor soaked with oil while a boy sits on a chair carved from tinder. Oberyn considered him. You speak like a man who has learned to love kindling, he said. Be careful. The trick of it is that fire loves you back. Afterward, the hours came not in a line but like a flock. This one pecking, that one wheeling, another decided by the dog in the next field. Jaime learned to be present for all of them. He stood at Tommen's right hand while the boy accepted condolences and pledges he scarcely understood. He dismissed gold cloaks whose love of bribe had outgrown their love of standing. He took bread with men whose eyes measured him and did not stop measuring until they had marked him to the marrow. He visited the White Book as a man visits a friend who has declined without telling anyone and will not be coaxed into anything more lively, allowing only to sit near me. He wrote another line when he had earned it. He erased none. He found Brienne gone, as he had permitted, and heard from the gate sergeant how she had left at dawn with a horse, built more for endurance than elegance, and a purse that would buy a winter in the Riverlands or 2 summers, if a woman was clever. She had taken the road north, because all roads that wish to become true roads turn north at some point. It is their nature. He let her be gone and did not send a man to follow her to satisfy a curiosity he had learned to call by its right name. Interference disguised as care. He sat with Margaery in rooms that had learned to hold 2 queens' worth of breath, and still not burst, and he watched her speak to Tommen the way one speaks to a dog, one means to train with love. Repeat the command. Reward the attempt. Ignore the failure without letting it pass as a story one tells oneself to avoid work. He admired the craft. He did not forget that craft aimed always at something sharp, even when the tools were made of velvet. He found himself liking her, which was not the same as trusting her, and liking, he had discovered, was often more useful than trust. Olenna found him again, as if she kept a private map of the keep on which his steps were a red line. "You begin to look like a man who knows where he is," she observed. "You will forgive me if I choose to believe it only when I see you take a difficult turning without pausing to check if the ceiling will fall." "I have taken one," he said, surprising them both. She did not ask. She had a talent for letting holes remain holes, especially when they looked over places where she had no intention of stepping. "Good," she said. "Take another. Remove the worst of your white cloaks and hang them somewhere they can do less harm. The one with the beard, Tyrell with steel, Sir Boros. The one who seems built to frighten children by taking bread from them, Sir Meryn. They are examples of a kind we are told to respect. Do not replace them with men whose mouths have learned to shut. They will be less dangerous in rooms and more useful in doorways." He did as much of it as the day would allow. Men do not replace themselves without resentment. He offered dismissals like gifts, and discovered that the right gift unmans less than the wrong command. He relieved Sir Boros of his post as a man lays a heavy stone down in a field, and decides he will plow a different line. He told Sir Meryn that the boy would sleep better with a different sort of guardian at his door. He sent Sir Loras to the Stepstones with 3 ships to teach the boy to hear of victory, without needing to taste blood to believe in it. Loras went with the insufferable gladness of a man sure that triumph awaits him wherever he lays his lance. Jaime envied him nothing, except perhaps the shape of that certainty, the way it carves clean lines out of fog. In the sept, candles grew tired of proving themselves. Cersei lay where the sisters arranged her, and learned to be a story. Men's voices around her grew quiet out of habit rather than respect. The dead could not be offended by small conversations. Tommen knelt and recited prayers small boys say to make their mothers smile. Margaery knelt and made the right shapes with her hands. Jaime stood and tried to feel the gravity of stones under him, and not the pull of the hole he had made in the world. He had not allowed himself to look from the balcony since that morning. He permitted himself once to stand by the window and let his eyes find the place where stone had met flesh, and the meeting had ended one life and freed a dozen others to begin moving differently. He did not take satisfaction. He did not take horror. He took knowledge and folded it into himself like a man folds a knife he intends to carry without drawing. On the 4th day, ravens left the keep in a black, thoughtful column. The tales they bore would multiply as tales do when they fly. By the time they reached Old Town and White Harbor and Sunspear, the queen would have died for love, for despair, for a oath she had kept too well, for a wrong she had finally thought to right, for a slip of silk under a heel that had taken too much wine. Tywin would have died clutching his chest, defying his murderer, demanding to know which fool thought it wise to interrupt a man attending to honest need. He would have died in his bed with his children around him. He would have died in armor with a sword in his hand. He would have died for sins unstated by men who preferred to keep such accounts for their private pleasure. The realm would believe the version that helped it sleep. Jaime had grown used to men who needed sleep. He did not yet know whether he himself would earn any. A courier from the Vale brought rumor disguised as report. Littlefinger had married a lady and pushed another through a hole in the world's face. Sansa Stark had vanished into stones and a new name. Somewhere on the quiet roads of the Riverlands, a tall woman with a stubborn mouth followed not the trail but the idea of one, and the idea did not tire. Jaime considered that this was the closest thing to hope a man like him could purchase. A rumor of a woman doing a difficult thing because she had decided it was the thing she had to do, and no money in it. In the nights that followed, he returned to the yard and Ilan Payne's patient cruelty. He learned the new weight of his body. The gold hand taught him to be precise because it refused the dirty work of feeling. He found he could use it to take a blow that would have broken bone and leave a bruise on brass. He learned to step sideways at just the moment a large man commits to forward. He learned to conserve his wind because breath is a coin, and even a Lannister can spend too quickly. At times he laughed aloud when a movement came clean, and the laugh surprised him into dropping his guard and taking a welt he had earned. He accepted these as a man accepts weather. He visited his sister's grave when it became a grave, and the day's work no longer needed his presence as a man needs water. The tomb they had given her was smaller than the one she would have wanted, and larger than the one he thought she deserved. He placed no flower upon it. He had long since used up the portion of his life in which gestures like that felt like anything but lies men told to themselves to smooth a rough surface. He stood and said nothing until saying nothing had been finished. Once, as he turned to leave, he found himself looking at a young septa, whose face he had seen in corridors carrying bowls, and in the queen's hinter rooms waiting with linen. She had a droop to her left eye that made her look perpetually concerned, which was perhaps why the faith had taken to her. Concern is a good advertisement for empty rooms. She did not look away, and he realized with a small astonishment that she knew who he was and did not fear him. It was a strange sensation to be known without being judged. He left the sept and learned that sensation had taken a small portion of his weight with it. News came from Dorne by way of Braavos, which is to say it came in a story wrapped in coin. Oberyn had written to a sister who wrote to a sell-sale who, having survived a fight he had not expected to, came ashore to drink and talk and sell his talking. The mountain had burned a village for sport between appointments. Men had died who had not been appointed to die. Kevin called for the Lord of Clegane and received an answer from a steward who had always thought far more of himself than his master had, and had acquired on short notice a kind of boldness that looked very much like stupidity. Jaime asked for Sir Gregor to be put under iron until the matter found air. The steward sent back a horseman who had lost a piece of ear to make the point that the kennel did not answer to the house. Oberyn smiled when he heard it, and the smile lived long in men's sleep. "We will ride," Kevin said to Jaime in the quiet that comes after men have diminished themselves by shouting. "Not you. Send a man whose love of noise is smaller than his love of work." "Sandor knows his brother," Jaime said without thinking, and then remembered that the hound had left his post to escort a girl and gone into the wild in pursuit of coin, or perhaps loss, which is a kind of coin with the king's face rubbed off. "He will not come back for us." "Then send a man the dogs will not bite," Kevin said. "If they bite him, we will have learned something. If they do not, we will have learned something else." He rubbed his jaw as if the day had grown stubble while he was not looking. "If the mountain comes to the city, he will not leave it as a man. I will promise that to a baron and ask him to stay his hand until we have arranged our cauldron, so his stirring does not pour the soup into the fire." Oberyn stayed, and the city began to arrange its days around the danger of him, the way a house arranges itself around a cracked wall. "You mean to fix when you have time and then live without confessing you, like the way the light goes through it." He took his pleasure without apology, and he took it with a meticulous grace that made scandal seem a synonym for art. He met with Jaime twice more at windows and once in the yard. The last time, he watched Jaime take Ilyn's strike on the gold and turn it with a sharpness that would have pleased any teacher. "You learn," the prince observed. "The sword has more patience than men," Jaime said, breathing hard. "Not more than some women," Oberyn returned, and tipped 2 fingers in the direction where the river became the sea. "We have women in Dorne who will teach you more than that hand can hold. You might come and discover whether your vows are a thing you wear like a shirt or like a skin." "I have learned the difference," Jaime said. "I am learning." "Good," Oberyn said. "Learning is the only joy the gods forgot to charge for." He turned, and the spear he had not brought was present anyway. The way a man's reputation is present in rooms he has never entered. "Tell your uncle that I will have my justice. Tell him that if he attempts to cheat me with a story, I will give him a better one, and the city will prefer mine." "Then Tyrell," Jaime told Kevin, who nodded and made a small adjustment somewhere in the invisible ledger he carried between his ribs. "We will give him a head," the hand said. "It may be attached when we bring it into the hall. It will not be attached when we take it out." Winter announced its intention by sending cold sooner than color. The court pulled furs from the coffer and pretended they were sufficiently grand to render the season inoffensive. Tommen put his hand in a falcon's glove and learned to hold the patience of a bird whose eye could look through men. He learned a little chess and a little silence. He learned the names of the men who thought they would rule him and the shape of their hands when they believed themselves unseen. He learned to look at his uncle as a man looks at a hill he intends to climb not by running, but by choosing footfalls that will not slide. Jaime visited the forges where the last wildfire had been poured into glass, and the last war had given men work they understood. He watched armor hammered. He watched nails drawn. He watched a boy learn that a hammer is more a song than a blow. The smoke coated his tongue and did not quite taste like penance. He sat at his father's desk once when the room was empty and placed his palm where Tywin's had rested when he had written the order that had slaughtered a city into compliance once before. The wood held a warmth that was more memory than sun. He took his hand away and did not clean it. One afternoon, as the city remembered it, might have a summer before the hard months set their teeth, he went into the lower places without escort. A man who has decided to save something in a city will always go down. It is the only direction assistance ever lives in. He walked among sellers and buyers and boys who were not yet one and girls who had learned to be mothers to men who had learned to be boys again when drunk. He saw his own sigil stitched onto a baker's cap and scowled at the presumption, and then bought 2 loaves and distributed them clumsily and discovered there is a clumsy grace available to men who do not practice charity as a performance. A woman blessed him, because what else do you do when a lion hands you bread? A boy called him Kingslayer without malice. He turned and smiled, and the boy discovered his own humor larger than the insult and laughed. And the laugh grew, and the 2 of them were men for a moment, which is often the most peace a city will give. At dusk, the bells sounded different. Less gossip, more argument. Jaime looked up from the small street, where he had paused to listen to a man tune a lute to a song he could not afford to forget, and saw a troop of Dornishmen in colors too fine for the dust that had chosen to wear them. Their captain's face was a coin struck with a promise and a threat. Serried mustaches, eyes that drank little and saw much. The mountain would come. The prince would have his spectacle. The city would lean forward, greedy for the point of a spear to draw a single bead of red and make a story for the children of men who had nothing else to hand down. He went back to the keep and stood at the window where he had taught himself to measure his breathing against the city's. Margaery's laugh tilted down the corridor like a flask poured carefully. Tommen shouted once, "Joy, not fear." The sound was small, and he loved it for that. The river turned her gray side to the last light. The walls were walls, which is a comfort and a lie. When sleep found him, it did so rudely, as a debt collector comes. He dreamed that he was climbing a tower whose stairs had been cut too shallow for men with adult feet. At the top, a bed weighted with sheets that had never felt a body. He lay down, and the bed became a field full of grass. He lay down in the grass, and it became water. He lay down in the water, and it became stone. When he woke, his hand hurt where the gold joined flesh, and he realized that pain was the only tutor he had never dismissed. By the time the first hard frost silvered the garden where the queen had once sat, to be admired by men who loved her shape more than her mind, the city had learned to live with 2 absences. Men have a genius for this. They practiced calling those absences fate. Jaime did not correct them. He only put his hand on the book and wrote the next line when the day had been worthy of it. He did not always succeed. You cannot always earn your own sentences. Some days he wrote nothing, and sat with the blankness, and discovered that sitting with blankness is also a kind of labor. Word came from the Trident that men with no sigils and too much memory had begun to wear songs in their belts and justice in their boots. They called themselves something that did not need to be remembered in the hall. Word came from the wall that a boy in black had been chosen to be Lord Commander because he had learned to say no when older men expected him to say yes. Word came from the east that a girl with dragons had learned to be a queen for an afternoon, and a mother for a night, and a tyrant for a morning, and would perhaps become a woman on a day when the wind was kinder. Word came from the Riverlands that a long-faced man with tired kindness had taken to hanged men like a craftsman takes to a wood he knows in his hands. The realm continued. It always does. Jaime learned to hear it as weather, not as judgment. One evening, rain came clean and without precedent. The kind of rain the city cannot plan for, and thus accepts like generosity. He stood in it like a man at a baptism he did not know he had requested, and let it run into the join of gold and flesh until it cooled the itch that never left him. Tommen walked out into it with his hair slicked to his head and his mouth opened to drink from the sky, and Marjorie allowed it because, to forbid, it would have felt like telling the gods their table manners offended. They all three stood and let themselves be ridiculous, and in that ridiculousness, Jaime felt human in the way he had once mistaken for weakness. Later, when the torches hissed in the damp, and the servants shook their heads and wiped their sleeves, Kevin brought in a letter as drab as a farmer's tunic. It had ridden from the Reach and taken on that country's sensibleness. It asked for grain. Men always ask for grain when winter threatens to press them into smaller shapes. Jaime read it and discovered that his mind could make a list of roads and wagons without his father's hand to guide it. He took up a pen and wrote a reply that sent wheat where it would be less likely to be stolen and more likely to be eaten. He sealed it and did not attempt to copy his father's patience with wax. He did not need to. He was not writing as Tywin's son. He was writing as the man who had thrown a woman into the morning and saved a boy from fire twice in one lifetime. On the night he realized this, he slept cleanly for the first time since the sept candles had gone to stubs. No dreams came to him. No knives asked him if he intended to confess himself upon them. When he woke, the city was simply there, as it had been the day before, and would be the day after. A beast that had learned to breathe because men kept it fed with hope and meat and the endless chewing of their small contentments. He sat with the book and wrote without looking up. He stood where he had to, when he had to, and did not reach for praise after. He kept the king from 1,000 cuts that would not have been noticed until the boy bled to death. He chose duty when desire asked to be called by its other name. He took the names men thrust at him and made them useful or let them drop. He lifted the quill and let the ink dry, and when it had, he looked outside at the place where stone remembers everything done upon it and gives none of it back. He thought of Brienne riding under a gray sky toward a girl with a wolf's mouth full of stubbornness. He thought of a brother on a ship smelling of tar and humiliated theory. He thought of a prince who would take the head he had been promised and put his spear away for a season. He thought of a boy whose crown would fit and fit again as his head grew into it. He thought, finally, of a man who had learned to keep his word to a page and found it both easier and harder than he had imagined. Then he rose, because there is always another hour that asks for a hand on it, and he put his feet upon the stone, and the stone held.